somos Raúl Cortés de Monaco Producciones y Juan Castillón de una clínica osteopática, los creadores del documental La ciencia de la osteopatía.
Si estáis viendo esto, suponemos que es o porque sois curiosos, o porque sois escépticos en relación a la osteopatía y queréis conocer, o porque habéis sentido alguna vez el beneficio de este abordaje, o quizás sabéis o no sabéis exactamente lo que es, o simplemente amáis la osteopatía. En todos los casos creemos que el visionado de este documental os puede aportar algo positivo.
Después de varios estrenos tanto en España como en Europa, en los que hemos sido muy bien acogidos, hemos sentido una gran emoción, con salas llenas a rebosar, hemos decidido por fin ofrecer la ciencia de la osteopatía.
Después de haber luchado para que se visionara este documental en varios medios de comunicación sin que ninguno de ellos mostrara ningún interés, pensamos que es necesario hacer este trabajo viral ya. Para ello necesitamos la ayuda de cada uno de vosotros. Hemos puesto mucho trabajo, esfuerzo y dinero por la osteopatía y queremos brindaros a todos este trabajo porque creemos firmemente que puede ayudar a nuestra profesión y puede cambiar muchas mentes.
Por eso os pedimos a cambio que compartáis masivamente este documental con vuestros contactos, pacientes, familiares, conocidos, y pedirles a todos ellos que hagan lo mismo. Queremos llegar lo más lejos posible. Para ello también hemos confeccionado el documental tanto en francés como en inglés. Si nos ayudáis, podemos hacer que la situación de la osteopatía cambie no solo en nuestro país.
Esa fuerza e ilusión que percibimos en cada estreno que realizamos se tiene que transformar en hechos que nos permiten avanzar en la unidad de acción. Y ahora, sin más, os dejamos disfrutar de La ciencia de la osteopatía, el primer documental en el mundo en este género. Acordaros, compartir al máximo, seguirnos en redes, porque la osteopatía y la sociedad os necesitan.
Hasta pronto.
Everything started here. The primordial explosion, a chain reaction that created the basis of all matter needed in the evolution of the universe through elements such as carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and iron. After years of analysis, astrophysics have observed the constant balance between galaxies, solar systems, and planets, and which are the reactions that happen to astronomical phenomena, stating that the laws of physics and chemistry are equally applied to all celestial bodies. The closest example we can find is the Earth. It is a living organism able to remain balanced, reach the homeostasis, continually adapting to changes and acting as a functional unit that makes life possible as we know it. On a smaller scale, there is the human being, an organism formed by millions of cells, bacteria, and atoms that act synergistically before any internal or external reaction. The link between our inner and outer wall leaves us a great reflection. What makes us think that we function in a different way than the rest of the universe does? There is a centenary science that gives us a view of the body that respects these universal laws of nature and accompanies the organism through the path of balance and health.
In 1861, 3 bulls says I.
Year 1864. State of Missouri. The American Civil War is coming to an end, but a tragic fact marked the life of a family, a man and a profession. The death of his 3 children in a few days, caused by an illness that was incurable in that time, became a turning point for Dr. Andrew Taylor Still.
It was, as I'm told by Anne Wales, when Dr. Still lost 3 of his children in 1 week to cerebrospinal meningitis, that he, in that moment of his personal grief, he made a prayer that he would find a way of healing to alleviate human suffering.
The impotence caused by such events became the reason that definitely challenged Dr. Still into searching the cause of the illness.
Originally, osteopaths in the late 1800s, when Andrew Taylor Still opened the first osteopathic school in 1892, were practicing a different form of healthcare. He developed a form of medicine, surgery, and obstetrics that used osteopathic manipulation as the foundation of its treatment. He formed a drugless form of medicine, surgery, and obstetrics, because at that time, if a patient didn't die from the disease, they died from the treatment.
Andrew continued investigating the origin and solution of the illness by completely knowing the human anatomy and physiology, giving already a glimpse of his ideas related to the hands-on approach and the gradually avoidance of medication in his treatments. He was convinced that the human body's innate intelligence was able to provide the medicines it needed. He also believed that the anatomic structure must be free without any obstacles so as to let the inherent strength of the body appear.
Osteopathy honors that the body itself, that the living being, a living organism, is innately self-organizing and has an intelligence that's been there throughout evolution. And so what we're doing is engaging with the self-correcting mechanism and intelligence within the body. And in the same way, if you do that every day, you become aware that there's a self-organizing intelligence in the life processes themselves, and that we are part of the whole. We're part of the whole of nature. And health is partly being in relationship, being in context, being in harmony with our environment, just as the body should be in harmony within itself.
It took years of investigation, practice and observation of nature, and his constant ability of adaptation to acquire all this knowledge. The study of other therapeutic aspects and movements that were developed in that period, such as bone setters, phrenology, hypnotism, Darwinism, or spiritualism, finally contributed to the appearance of a new health concept. It wasn't until 1885 that the word osteopathy was coined. During all this time, the use of his theories and his excellent results as an itinerant physician had detractors. The church branded Steele's methods and theories as witchcraft, magic, and blasphemies against God. There was such a rejection that even a Methodist prayer from Macon spread that he was possessed by Satan, and he could also be dangerous for the community. On its behalf, the medical community considered that Dr. Steele's practices were inappropriate for his status as a doctor, and they also thought that his theories were product of a person of unsound mind, rather than a science man.
I think his medical peers responded in a little bit confusion and frustration because Dr. Steele was having success, doing things that seemed to help. The conflict was that they didn't understand it and he was drawing patients away. And I think that's the problem today. In our world of health, physiotherapists, medical doctors, if an osteopath can come in and with their hands heal somebody very quickly, very simply, without a lot of expense, it basically is a threat to their more expensive, more labor-intensive, and maybe even more invasive way of working on people.
His determination and confidence in his new science, supported by his outcomes, led Dr. Steele to open a school to teach all the knowledge he had gathered throughout many years. It was on the 1st of November 1892 when the first osteopathy school opened. Steele and the Scottish anatomist Dr. William Smith started their teaching path with 12 students in a stark and simple wooden cabin. Among them, there were some of his children. The school was named American School of Osteopathy, ASO.
So initially when Dr. Steele started out with the American School of Osteopathy, it was just 2 classes. Him and then William Smith, a professor and doctor, taught anatomy. And so you were learning anatomy and osteopathic technique. Well, when they tried to get osteopathy legalized in the state of Missouri, they said the curriculum wasn't broad enough. And so they kept adding more and more classes for the students to take. So suddenly, you weren't doing a 2-course class, you were doing a 2-year class, and then later a 3-year class. And after Dr. Steele passed away, a 4th year became mandatory.
The school's success was spectacular. Thousands of people from other states went to the ASO in Kirksville to be instructed and to be treated. The school had to be expanded. They built annexes. They also had to adapt to the sudden changes that were happening, such as adjusting the academic curriculum, legalizing the profession, low-quality trainings in other schools, and the need of investigating osteopathic methods for the development and recognition of osteopathy. Osteopathy progressively spread quickly. First, it spread through the US and later it arrived to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. In England, in 1917, a former student of Dr. Steele, Dr. John Martin Littlejohn, decided to found the first osteopathy school in Europe, the British School of Osteopathy. This school, together with the European School of Osteopathy in Maidstone, contributed to the arising of osteopathy all over Europe. Nowadays, the progression and expansion of osteopathy is clear. Especially in the last 20 years, there has been a constant increase of professionals and users that decide to try this kind of therapeutic approach. Let's try to understand what it is and in what it is based this global osteopathic concept.
Moi, je ne reprendrai pas les définitions classiques, il y a plein de définitions de l'ostéopathie. Pour moi, l'ostéopathie, ça fait partie d'une médecine manuelle qui existe depuis le départ. Le toucher a toujours été présent pour faire du bien. Dans la vie aussi, toutes les mamans, elles touchent leur bébé ou elles leur font des câlins pour leur faire du bien. Simplement, maintenant, au début du 21e siècle où nous sommes, ce qui est important, c'est que c'est une partie de la médecine qui est écologique. On n'utilise que nos mains, on n'utilise que ce qui est naturel, on utilise les ressources de ce qui est à l'intérieur de nous. Steele, il disait, la pharmacie du bon Dieu, elle est à l'intérieur de nous. On n'a pas besoin de faire toute la chimie qu'il y a. C'est en plus une approche qui est sociale. On passe du temps à toucher les patients. Et on y reviendra peut-être, mais le toucher, c'est un sens qui est extraordinaire. Donc c'est écologique, c'est social, puisque ça crée du lien, on touche les gens, c'est vraiment important. Et en plus, c'est une façon de soigner qui est efficiente, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a un rapport efficacité-coût qui est vraiment remarquable. Soigner en ostéopathie, ça coûte 7 fois moins cher dans son domaine de compétences.
So what differentiates osteopathy, I think, from any other healing art is that the first thing we do is we connect with something that is healthy in that individual. And that is our reference point. Healing doesn't come from what's diseased in a person. Healing comes from what's healthy. And that gets confusing for a lot of people because it sounds as if it's esoteric or unavailable to a clinician. But in reality, an osteopathic treatment is simple. All we do is we engage and identify and connect with something that's healthy in the body. And then we also identify something that's diseased. And we hold those two perceptual fields in our awareness. And then something happens. An osteopathic treatment is not bringing the health to the disease or bringing the disease to the health. It's holding those two opposites in the container of our attention, and then something alchemical happens within the body, and it allows the person to find their own therapeutic process.
Osteopathy affords the society an innovative thought. Concepts like health or illness are questioned and redefined by its philosophy.
And if we think of the osteopathic model for health within the body, we think of homeostasis, we think of all the organ systems working together. We think of the self-corrective mechanism also at work within the skeletal, the musculoskeletal fascial structure.
C'est qu'on voit un microcosme qui vit dans un macrocosme et on sait que la force qui est là, elle est dedans. Et c'est ce que Steele disait donc, respecter la force innée du patient. Et nous, on est là par notre présence, par notre compréhension des systèmes, pour essayer d'ouvrir, d'enlever les obstacles à l'expression de la force innée. On n'est pas là pour, de l'extérieur, apporter des éléments pour relancer. Non, non, ça ne marche pas comme ça en réalité. Ça ne fonctionne pas comme ça, la santé.
We live in a capitalist, industrialized, and competitive society where the results prevail, rapidity becomes the modus vivendi, and health has become a business for some people. The quick effect of medication is compulsory in order to follow the rhythm and which are submitted, and the adverse effects of these medicines are widely known by the health professionals and its users. The protracted waiting list in healthcare centers that in part are caused by the lack of medical staff forces them to reduce the visit's time, and it is prejudicial for the healthcare services. This fact implies that patients increasingly consider the use of natural therapies like osteopathy, which are directed to find the main cause of certain problems, instead of taking anti-inflammatory medicines or analgesics that only act against the symptoms.
Ci sono ormai studi pubblicati su giornali molto rilevanti, quindi il British Medical Journal piuttosto che il New England Journal, piuttosto che il JAMA, che dimostrano come in alcune condizioni la sovramedicazione è un problema, sia in termini di effetti collaterali sulla persona, sia in termini di costi per i sistemi sanitari. Tant'è vero che proprio recentemente sono stati stimati circa 3 miliardi di dollari l'anno che in realtà vengono consumati per le condizioni di sovramedicazione dei pazienti.
Overmedication has been labeled as a great healthcare problem. It could be partly resolved through the mutual knowledge of the different fields of healthcare. Osteopathy was raised as a potential tool for this aim.
La osteopatía en nuestro ámbito no tiene el reconocimiento que seguramente debería tener. Por eso, desde el Instituto de Osteopatía, 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 desde el Instituto de y por tanto un mayor conocimiento pues favorecería que se hicieran indicaciones de osteopatía. En ese sentido todas pueden tener una indicación que si el médico las conoce, muchas veces las desconocemos cuáles efectos tienen o qué beneficios tienen, pues igual se podría disminuir la medicación.
Osteopathy and orthodox medicine are a perfect complementary partnership if they acknowledge each other. Obviously, one of the things an osteopath has to do when a patient comes is to check the patient carefully to see if there's anything that needs urgent medical testing or treatment, which if they did not, they would be losing precious time. So obviously we have to work very much with the medical side of the situation in mind.
Osteopathy can lead the person to an equilibrated health state. This approach helps to awake the consciousness of the patient about their health, the state of which we should take responsibility for through an appropriate diet and exercise. Many people start appreciating this manual treatment that uses the sense of touch, a primary tool in every hands-on therapy that is considered a way of transmission between the physiotherapist and the patient that leads to health positive effects.
We know from studies done in animals that communication, touch is a big part of forging that relationship. There are studies that clearly show that touch and caring for someone produces considerable amounts of oxytocin, which improves their development, but also causes a number of positive outcomes in their health. We want to find out actually if that is something that actually might be one of the mechanisms behind osteopathic treatment. So at this stage we're developing an hypothesis paper, hopefully that will be published, and we also start developing some ideas for a randomized control trial exploring that in the context of pediatric care. And the reasons for that is the babies are the ideal population for investigating that. Why? Because if one thinks about pleasant touch as adults, we know what's pleasant and what's not pleasant. Pain could be pleasant. With the babies, not that they're devoid of emotions, but in particular if you're thinking about preterm infants, there will not be constructs yet of what's nice or what's not nice. They will respond to maybe the mother, they respond to the environment, to the stimulation.
Touch is a very powerful tool, just by itself. One of the primary mediators that's released with touch is oxytocin. And oxytocin is a very powerful drug in terms of its effects on how people respond to each other, how they feel about their situation, and whether they feel safe or not.
The continuous search of wellness attracts people to a global therapeutic point of view, which is individualized and based in the human contact, known since its inception by the use of joint manipulations. But was Andrew Taylor Still the first to use this type of manipulations? In fact, the first historical reference that provides us an evidence of the spinal manipulation dates back to approximately the year 400 before Christ by Hippocrates. He was considered the father of medicine and the first doctor who described the use of these techniques for the treatment of scoliosis. In the 2nd century after Christ, Claudius Galen, a renowned Roman surgeon, left evidences of the use of spinal manipulation in patients with ambulation difficulties. At the beginning of the 11th century, in the Middle East, Avicenna, known as the Doctor of Doctors, included descriptions of Hippocrates' techniques in his medical work, the Book of Healing. In 1543, with the rebirth of medicine, we found descriptions of the use of manipulations from Andreas Berzelius, who was a Belgian doctor known for his anatomic studies, and from the famous French surgeon Ambroise Paré in 1580. In 1656, we also find these descriptions in Friar Thomas' book, The Complete Bone Setter. And in 1674, in Johann Scultetus' book, The Surgeon's Storehouse, in which he included the manipulative methods of Hippocrates. Apparently, since the 18th century, the doctors and surgeons tended to abandon the acceptation of the use of manipulations. The reasons of this are not clear enough, but it is thought that it could be due to the ineffectiveness of its indiscriminate use or the danger that involved the manipulation of the damaged spine of a tuberculosis patient, a serious epidemic of that time. It was during this period when the manipulation was introduced in the knowledge of healers from villages in different areas of Europe, Asia, and America. So as we can see, the origin of the manual therapy is unquestionable, and in part, Dr. Still created his new science thanks to the study of spinal manipulations history. According to him, the joint manipulations are only the means to achieve a result. What is important and differentiates it from other approaches is the therapeutic concept and the basic principles used by the osteopaths.
Doing manipulation doesn't mean you're an osteopath. Practicing a philosophy where you look at the patient and you attempt to help that patient find health, which might mean you give them a pharmaceutical, but then you examine what are all the things that are standing between this person and health. That's the difference.
The benefits of this approach are noticed by many people that go to osteopathic offices for different reasons.
La gran mayoría de pacientes vienen por un tema de dolor. Las primeras visitas suelen ser por un dolor que se ha cronificado. Hoy en día los osteópatas vemos gente que no encuentra alivio en la medicina convencional e incluso gente que ha probado otro tipo de terapias y que no les funciona. Tenemos que entender que nuestro trabajo va muy a caballo entre lo que es una causa patológica o una causa funcional, y muchas veces hay una causa funcional, y con esto me refiero a que a veces no todas las pruebas médicas justifican ese dolor, pero ese dolor existe y está ahí.
We will explain how a session of this manual medicine works, in order to have a better understanding of the functioning of osteopathy. Firstly, it is fundamental to check the medical history and interview the patient in the first visit as well as in the following ones. This will lead the osteopath to a better diagnosis. It has been verified that the conversation with the patient and listening to them has a positive effect in their health. For this reason, it is very important for the osteopath to take the necessary time to attend the patient. For that purpose, many types of examinations must be done. First of all, the medical tests are carried out in order to discard any kind of pathology that should be treated with conventional medicine. Secondly, osteopathic tests, in which the touch sensitiveness and the osteopath's perception take action. All this information will allow the osteopath to start the treatment. But what is the objective?
I think that osteopaths and osteopathic treatment improve the quality of life, which is different than improving life. We also, mostly, we improve the expression of health. So many times in an osteopathic setting, what ends up happening is the full expression of what's healthy in the body is blocked. And a lot of what osteopathic treatment is not about treating disease, it's about unblocking the full expression of what's healthy in the body. The goal of an osteopathic treatment is to engage a natural therapeutic process in the body.
What makes an osteopathic treatment effective? Let's see some of the physiological mechanisms that occur when the osteopath acts on the human body.
Manipulation, I think, has several effects on the body. If the primary problem is a muscle tension, and many times it is, then doing whatever's necessary to release that tension allows freer circulation of blood and lymph. It relieves impulse traffic to the spinal cord. That is abnormal impulse traffic, normalizes impulse traffic, allows then the spinal neurons to reset their activity to normal, and then that also changes the impulse traffic up to the central nervous system, which has the effect of changing the downstream flows. If there is nociception involved, pain, then relieving the problems of circulatory flows and so on allows the tissues to not be so inflamed, and relieves then the nociceptive inputs to the cord, which allows the excitability of the spinal tissues, neurons, to decrease and become normal input-output functions again. So now at the cellular level, the cellular processes would be secondary mostly to normalizing blood and lymph flow, because without sufficient blood flow and lymph flow, the cells build up waste products and metabolic changes occur that normalize with the circulatory flows. I think that is really what is happening rather than any particular intracellular change, except that the metabolic processes can normalize in the affected tissues.
Fundamentalmente los osteópatas trabajamos con evidencias clínicas. Sabemos el resultado de nuestras técnicas por las consecuencias que tienen nuestros pacientes y porque vemos su evolución clínica en nuestras consultas. Pero muchas veces no sabemos el porqué, cuál es exactamente el mecanismo con el que hemos interactuado con estas técnicas. El método científico nos permite averiguar precisamente esto, el por qué nuestras técnicas funcionan, qué mecanismos biológicos y neurofisiológicos estamos utilizando cuando ponemos las manos encima del paciente y el por qué estas técnicas tienen un efecto. Un ejemplo de ello es el campo de los reflejos somatoviscerales y viscerosomáticos. Este es un campo que siempre ha suscitado mucho interés en el mundo osteopático por el hecho de ser una puerta de entrada a mecanismos menos accesibles manualmente que el sistema musculoesquelético, mecanismos como el sistema nervioso autónomo, el sistema endocrino o el sistema inmunitario.
Osteopathy has existed for many years already, and we could assert that it has helped and it is helping many people affected by diverse diseases and illnesses that comprehend problems of musculoskeletal origin, by being sometimes a primary or contributing treatment in the gastrointestinal, cardiorespiratory, urogenital, neurological, obstetrical, pediatric, or even emotional fields. In fact, every year, thousands of patients go to osteopathic offices. But does osteopathy have any limitation? Is it capable to cure everything?
Es muy importante tener en cuenta que la osteopatía, aunque tiene una base muy holística, se dedica a lo que se dedica, y es básicamente a la mecánica y a la estructura. Y aunque hay una parte muy funcional que puede ayudar, nosotros deberíamos ser capaces de decirle al paciente qué porcentaje de efectividad está en nuestra mano.
Mais il faut connaître ses limites. C'est très très important. Un conseil que je donnerais, attention, définis bien tes limites. Tes limites, c'est en fonction de ta connaissance. Définis tes limites, tu dois respecter le patient. Et respecter le patient, c'est lui dire, non, là je suis limité.
Sí que podemos acompañar a ciertas patologías o podemos tener una noción de acompañamiento de un paciente y ayudarle a que se encuentre mejor, a darle confort, a facilitarle el camino, pero solo hay una pequeña porción de todo ese gran pastel que es exclusivamente de la osteopatía. Y esto un profesional debería tenerlo claro, porque aunque trabajamos de un modo holístico, muchas veces quizás una buena dieta, una buena terapia psicológica, la actividad física o el tratamiento con un médico pertinente ante una patología van a ser básicos y van a ser mucho más efectivos que nuestro tratamiento.
Maybe An integrative approach in collaboration with other health professionals using the best part of each discipline would be one of the keys to improve our healthcare system.
Et pour moi, ce n'est pas une spécialité, ce n'est pas être paramédical. L'ostéopathie, c'est vraiment une médecine à part entière, mais qui est un chapitre de la médecine, qui doit s'intégrer dans une médecine intégrale, globale. Et je pense que l'avenir, c'est des centres de santé pluridisciplinaires. Et moi, j'essaie de travailler maintenant là où je travaille. Il y a aussi, aussi un podologue, il y a un chirurgien, des obstétriciens, il y a d'avoir toutes les spécialités médicales ensemble, c'est intéressant, et que le patient soit au centre du traitement, au lieu que ce soit les gens qui soient obligés d'aller courir partout.
Healthcare is a team approach. We all are team members in helping to care for people who have need. No one system in the whole world can treat all diseases or cure the ills of humankind. Allopathic medicine does not have all the answers to healthcare issues or disease care issues. And so healthcare is a team approach, and osteopathy form is an essential team player in the total healthcare of all people throughout the world.
Let's have a look at how osteopathy works together with other health professions in different areas of medicine in other countries and obtains positive outcomes for the patients. For example, in some hospitals of the US, osteopathy is used as a part of the preoperative and postoperative care in patients who have undertaken abdominal surgery. The surgeon Dr. Robert Madsen explains this to us.
I'm Dr. Madsen, and I'm emeritus professor here at Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine. I've spent most of my life, from 1971 till the present time, in surgery. The most well-prepared patients for elective surgery, not emergency, but elective surgery, are those that have been seen preoperatively in the doctor's office if he's a DO and has been treated manually for whatever ailments that he may have had, or just to get him ready. Now, an area where it is of great benefit is in the post-operative care of patients. Take the case of abdominal surgery, maybe a hysterectomy is done. It may be a prostate that we remove, or a gallbladder, that type of thing. Now, post-operatively, Mother Nature tends to quiet everything in the abdomen to promote healing. Well, as a result of that, normally, after, we'll say, a very common ordinary operation, there is a period of a few days, maybe longer, where the peristalsis of the intestine is quiet. Mother Nature does that to keep everything quiet to promote healing. Now then, the osteopathic approach is rather helpful. We've had a number of studies done, and I'll demonstrate here what we do to decrease this period of paralytic ileus. In other words, so we can get the patient to eat and drink on his own without IVs so much, and we get him home quicker.
In Italy, for several years already, osteopaths have been collaborating in various hospitals together with the conventional medicine in a direct and efficient way in the sections of neonatology and premature birth sections, which yield promising studies and results.
L'ultimo è forse quello che ci ha un po' dato più evidenze e un po' più di consistenza dei dati rispetto agli altri, è uno studio multicentrico che abbiamo pubblicato l'anno scorso su 3 ospedali tra il centro e il nord Italia. Nel totale abbiamo trattato circa 700 bambini, 350 trattati e 350 come gruppo di controllo, e abbiamo visto che alla fine del periodo di degenza i bambini trattati avevano una riduzione di circa 4 giorni rispetto a quelli non trattati. Questo significa una riduzione dei costi notevole per il sistema sanitario. Abbiamo stimato circa $500.000 di riduzione e ci ha consentito anche di dare un po' più di evidenza, un po' più di robustezza ai dati precedentemente pubblicati, che erano solamente su un centro e quindi un ospedale.
Although there are many other examples at a global scale that osteopathy collaborates within a multidisciplinary team, one of the points in common and the most asked by the health professionals is the implementation of a suitable and good quality academic training able to meet the needs of patients. Back in the late 19th century, Dr. Steele fought to keep the level of excellence of osteopathic teaching in the ASO. He knew that the respect to this profession depended on the good training, which would imply a better praxis. The fight keeps going on since the beginning. In Europe specifically, the standards are established by two documents, the European Regulation CEN 16686, which was delivered to the European Parliament by the European Federation of Osteopathy at the end of 2016.
La norma europea, la Osteopathic Healthcare Provision, es una norma que se ha editado muy recientemente, en 2015, y que es el resultado de la colaboración de todas las agencias de normalización europea, en las cuales se han puesto en común para crear un mínimo común denominador que establezca el marco competencial profesional, académico y ético de los profesionales de la osteopatía en Europa. Es un documento muy importante, es el primer acuerdo paneuropeo que establece unos criterios unificados. Es una norma de mínimos, no es una norma de máximos, pero sí es ese mínimo en el cual las organizaciones europeas de osteopatía han llegado a ponerse de acuerdo para considerarlo el criterio común que debe existir, ya digo, tanto académico como profesional como ético a nivel de la osteopatía.
This document contains two sections. One talks about the osteopathic practice, one talks about what the individual osteopath is supposed to do in his clinic, how he's supposed to deal with his patients, about confidentiality, but also about competencies that an osteopath should have. Then there is a second section that talks about education and that lists several important criteria that make up a good school. That's not just the duration of studies, but that's also if there is a teaching clinic, that's also if there are educational qualifications for the lecturers themselves, and a lot of other things.
Previously, there had been another precedent in which osteopathy was recognized at a global level through the regulation Benchmarks for Training in Osteopathy, published by the World Health Organization in 2010.
Que ya marcaba unos criterios comunes desde el punto de vista académico. Es un documento importante, es la OMS, la Organización Mundial de la Salud, diciéndonos que la osteopatía es una profesión sanitaria, que es una profesión independiente y que es una profesión de primera intención.
These standards are in some cases not obeyed by all the osteopathy schools, even though there is an organization called Osteopathic European Academic Network that tries to control its compliance. We are facing a serious problem because there exist schools of questionable quality that offer a way shorter training duration and they threaten the patient's safety.
Para mí no se trata de que en 2 años se haga una cantidad de horas similar a una formación de 4 o 5 años, sino se trata de la calidad y del tiempo que se necesita para formar una mano y para adaptar los conocimientos que tenemos. Quizás el problema es que en 2 años vamos a tener gente muy formada a nivel teórico, pero muy insuficientemente formada a nivel práctico. Incluso cuando acabas en 4 años no tienes suficientemente mano. Lo que yo me pregunto es qué tipo de profesional voy a tener como colega en un futuro.
Bueno, hay muchas ofertas rápidas, oportunistas, como hasta el ofrecimiento de la formación en 12 meses a distancia, autodenominaciones, formaciones cortas, formaciones solo basadas en enseñanza de técnicas. Una buena técnica es importante, pero que la técnica en sí no reemplaza al trasfondo filosófico del concepto osteopático. salida rápida, digamos, basada en el beneficio económico solamente. Hay detrás una especulación comercial y muchas veces una pérdida de la calidad que buscamos, ¿no? Como dentro de la formación lo más genuina posible que intentamos transmitir.
It is at this point that a regulation seems to be postulated as necessary.
Only qualified people are able to practice osteopathy, because one of the challenges that occurred in the United States when osteopathy was getting off the ground is that unless you had licensure, anybody could say that they were an osteopath and anybody could go into practice, and this is a dangerous situation. So I applaud those efforts going on in Europe and elsewhere in order to standardize the practice to make sure that the public is safeguarded and only the qualified can practice.
Uno de los problemas que implica la falta de regulación a nivel profesional es una competencia desleal. Una competencia desleal y además con un potencial de peligrosidad elevado. Si suponemos el caso, ¿no? Un paciente que decide ir a tratarse en alguien que no tiene la formación debida, es un paciente que de manera no consciente puede estar poniéndose en riesgo.
The study programs published in these standards as a reference for all the schools qualify the medical subject as indispensable in order to provide the necessary knowledge to the professionals and also to work in a multidisciplinary environment.
If you do not understand pathology, if you do not understand how you diagnose and recognize the pathology, how are you going to find this person's health? You don't know where you're starting from.
And let's go specifically into the anatomic field, which is an important part of the hands-on approach. Let's see which level of excellence should be applied in the osteopathic teaching.
En el conocimiento de la anatomía yo lo considero fundamental, el poder tener la oportunidad de trabajar directamente, no solamente de ver piezas, en este caso hablaríamos de lo que es la disección, de lo que es la prosección. Yo creo que los alumnos han de hacer prosección, es decir, venir a estudiar natural en cuerpo las estructuras anatómicas que han aprendido, verlas tridimensionalmente, ver la realidad. Eso es fundamental para el conocimiento anatómico. Una escuela que va a formar osteópatas tiene que ser muy rigurosa en la formación.
The tools that are used in osteopathic concept are the techniques in their learning. It is essential to dedicate time to the manipulative practice so as to execute the techniques in the most accurate and safe way. All this is achieved through the knowledge of the anatomical basis.
There are techniques that osteopaths use that have very definitive anatomical rationale. They clearly address an anatomical issue and they can be defended. There are techniques that, to my knowledge, do not at this point have rationale. Now, if you do not know the rationale for the technique, it does not mean that the rationale doesn't exist. It means that you don't know it. And to say something is absolutely rubbish because I don't know the rationale is a very arrogant position to take. The cranial techniques stand out because it is difficult to get a good rationale for them. Yet, to my knowledge, the field, the use of cranial technique is actually one of the only techniques in osteopathic medicine where a study was done that met all the criteria for being a valid research study and demonstrated efficacy. And that was the study by Mills looking at the use of osteopathy in the cranial field to treat acute otitis media.
In osteopathic teaching are increasingly using scientifically validated methods that favor a more rigorous and objective palpation training.
One of the things that the students that I've observed in a variety of educational settings don't get is a lot of feedback on their palpatory development skills. So the educational model both in the U.S. and abroad is very often a technique-driven educational model. That is, we'll teach students a variety of techniques, and then they're supposed to be able to perform them like someone who's standing up in front of them demonstrating them, and the better they can mimic the way the person demonstrated them to them, the better student they're thought to be.
Thanks to the introduction of these methods, the subjective factor is reduced and the students are able to improve their palpatory diagnosis abilities. They receive feedback in a more objective way in relation to the abnormality of the tissue's texture, their asymmetry, their movement restrictions, and their sensitiveness. It is very helpful for students to use mannequins equipped with technology that simulates pathologic situations in real time by imitating the body's vital functions. For example, blood pressure, ocular functions, and heart and breathing rate, in order to be decisive when diagnosing and efficient in their future professional life. Today's technology can also use ultrasounds as a diagnosis tool in the academic field. The papers published in relation to this type of technology applied to manual therapy support the academic training and give the students the opportunity to observe the normality of the tissues to detect any pathological or dysfunctional area and act properly on it. Within the most scientific academic field that is related to the advance of knowledge in neurobiology, osteopathy promotes trainings to remain at the forefront of science, strengthening the basis of a health profession.
Osteopathy has to get in connection to modern neurobiology. To lead osteopathy, or manual medicine, or integrated medicine, into the world of modern neurobiology. This is my interest here and my motivation to do this sophisticated teaching.
Both in America and in Europe, schools that offer a good quality training develop, through their students, research programs that pretend to give scientific evidence to a relatively young profession. But is osteopathy considered a science outside the academic fields?
I think it is a science with developing evidence. So we don't have a lot of evidence yet on osteopathy, osteopathic medicine. But that is true of a lot of sciences. And that's why we need to continue doing research on it to develop that evidence for the science of osteopathy. Osteopathy seems to be focused on treating the individual. And this opening up in the scientific community, becoming more open to these types of pragmatic trials where people are treated individually as they would be just when they're coming to see their clinician, has increased the acceptance of osteopathic research by the scientific community.
During the first years of osteopathy, it was when publishing articles became essential to lay the foundations and give the recognition this new profession needed.
Let me say that in terms of the beginning, that you had the establishment of what was called the A.T. Still Research Institute in Chicago around 1906. And you had some research studies coming from there, which were very interesting to me, many of which were physiologically based. then the Research Institute closed in Chicago, and that much of the research for decades that was done was carried out by one person, Louisa Burns, in California. And Dr. Burns produced studies that were interesting but were not published in external journals. And so her research was more private and proprietary until at Kirksville here that Stead Denslow, and later joined by I.M. Core, were able to launch a sustained research agenda where their results were published in outside basic science journals. So much of the research that was done was not clinical, but it was more the basic science mechanisms behind osteopathic medicine.
Nowadays, research projects within the osteopathic field are more frequently published. The studies related to a science in progress, like osteopathy, that needs to improve in some aspects are increasingly enhancing their quality levels. However, there exist several reasons that explain why the numbers of published articles does not reach the ideal level.
I think there are two types of osteopaths. Are those that are willing to new ideas and really proactively support research and the need to actually explore things and having a more robust knowledge. And I think there are a number of others that still consider that there is no need for research because evidence-based medicine is an evil that we don't need in the profession where everything is going to be standardized. I think part of that is, I would say, it probably has to do with sort of, a bit of a fear that maybe the research will show that things they believe that they actually occur and don't. Actually, they would test in a very tough way their belief system and the robustness of their hypotheses. But to do that research, the other thing that's will prevent us from doing large-scale research is funding. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where I don't think sometimes it's because we don't want to do the research, it's also the question of where we're going to get the money from to actually conduct large-scale studies.
The experience in some countries points to possible funding sources. In Italy, the amount of osteopathic studies results from the collaboration with medicine in hospitals. In other countries, research can only be done in the long term when associating with university institutions. Even with the lack of financial means, many professionals combine research and their clinical professional role. But which should be the priority type of research in the osteopathic field?
What we really need is we need to have research studies that prove that osteopathy works. And I think the MDs in particular see us as inferior because we don't have enough studies that show what we do is helpful. I don't think we need to do studies that are demonstrating the mechanisms of action of osteopathy. I don't really care how it works. I want people to know that it does work. So we need outcome studies. We need double-blind placebo-controlled studies where 10,000 people are treated with osteopathy and 10,000 people are controls in various different disease settings and showing that it works.
Creo que una postura inteligente por parte de los osteópatas en esta labor investigadora es incluir en los estudios análisis de coste-efectividad. Es importante que una intervención sea efectiva y que dé resultados clínicos, pero también es importante su eficiencia y ver qué aporta a la sociedad en términos de reducción de costes, de reducción de medicación que se da a la población o reducción de estancias hospitalarias. Si los osteópatas somos capaces de demostrar no solo que la osteopatía es efectiva clínicamente, sino que además puede reducir los costes sanitarios, yo creo que habremos hecho un paso muy importante.
A healthcare system created for the patient should take into account the possibility of including an osteopath, because he can improve the patient's quality of life and health, and, therefore, the healthcare costs will be reduced. The regulation of osteopathy in other countries on an international level proves that this inclusion is totally possible to implement. As a picture is worth 1,000 words, let's graphically see in which countries is osteopathy regulated as a healthcare profession, both at the teaching and professional levels. Osteopathy is currently regulated in every state of the US since approximately 50 years ago. In Australia, we can find a regulation of osteopathy since 1991. And in New Zealand, its neighboring country, since 2004. Within the African continent, osteopathy is regulated in the south of Africa since 1974. And moving on to Europe, we can observe that in the UK it has been regulated since 1993. Afterwards, it was regulated as a healthcare profession in Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, Iceland, Malta, Switzerland, Italy, Denmark and Luxembourg. Some European countries have a partial regulation, as for example, France, Andorra, Portugal, Monaco, Norway and Sweden. And there are other countries that have started a legal process of regulation like Ireland. And outside Europe, there are Argentina and Quebec, among others. With this data, why is osteopathy not regulated homogeneously in all the countries? Does the health of a person in the UK have a higher value than the one of a person in Spain? Is it all about the money, or are there other interests between?
No, no és un tema pressupostari. És un tema de falta de lideratge polític. I també de lobbies legítims, legítims, de lobbies potents, que consideren que ja ho fan i que no ha de ser una professió complementària. I jo diria que no veig un tema econòmic aquí. Però aquí hi ha una dissociació entre la usabilitat ciutadana. Jo vaig fer quan la gent era crítica en el Parlament de Catalunya, feia una pregunta als diputats. Quants dels que estem aquí, dels 135, hem anat alguna vegada a l'osteòpata o, és igual, a una altra teràpia? O quants familiars hi van? Bueno, en fi, com la resta, o més. O més. Perquè saben que més nivell de renda, més usabilitat. Això ha estat escrit, hi ha estadístiques. I a nivell d'Espanya, doncs, crec que era per una visió equivocada, perquè, evidentment, exercir la política i el lideratge polític no pots quedar bé amb tothom, però si hi ha una recomanació europea, si hi ha tantes persones que l'utilitzen, encara que fos només per seguretat clínica, perquè hi ha molt intrusisme. Falta lideratge polític, però la ciutadania continua anant. Els que tenen seguretat clínica i els que no. Per tant, continuem tenint un problema de salut pública aquí, de fet, no? Perquè, clar, allò que no està regulat és molt més susceptible de fer frau. Encara que fos perquè tema, inclús pels que estan en contra, diríem. I per tant, em sembla que és una assignatura pendent, que jo crec que hi ha d'haver alguna raó que jo no sé, sociològica, que no antropològica, quasi, perquè no acabo d'esbrinar, perquè la major part de països de la Unió Europea ho han anat fent i nosaltres ni tan sols hi ha un debat públic.
According to the Article 3 of the Treaty on European Union, the Article 45 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union and the Regulation number 492/2011 that standardizes the free movement of workers of the member states, without the regulation of osteopathy, there are some rights that are allegedly violated.
If you are used to getting osteopathic treatments in the UK, where it's regulated as a profession, and you move to Spain, you might want to go looking for an osteopath. And it's very important for the patient that he knows what to expect, that he knows this is the same meaning, this is the same profession, it's the same quality of treatment I will get. The same is true for professionals. If you trained as an osteopath in one country, and for whatever circumstances you want to move to another country, you should be able to exercise your profession there. You should be able to continue to work as an osteopath, and to enable that you need a similar regulation, you need a similar framework and similar standards.
The current situation involves a number of consequences, and most of them affect the patient.
La primera consecuencia de la no regulación de la osteopatía es una indefensión por parte de los pacientes. Yo creo que es el primer elemento que deberíamos proteger. O sea, es la base de todo. Debemos asegurar que el paciente, que aquel individuo con cualquier tipo de alteración física que visita al osteópata, cuando contacta con él mismo, pueda estar seguro de que aquel profesional con el cual contacta cumple con unos criterios mínimos adecuados. Hoy esto no es así. Hoy a nivel nacional no existe una regulación de esta profesión. Si me permitís simplificarlo mucho, cualquiera podría decir que es osteópata y esto es terrible. Es terrible porque a nivel del paciente le tiene que crear una inseguridad muy grande.
One of the fundamental principles of the biomedical ethics is the principle of autonomy of the patient. The principle of autonomy takes into account the freedom and responsibility of the patient, who chooses what is good for them even if the doctor has another opinion.
Els pacients, per què trien el que trien? A un s'hauria de preguntar, perquè si ho féssim tot tan bé, escolti, no tindrien clients. Pot haver-hi una publicitat enganyosa, per descomptat, que hi és, motiu més per regular-ho. Perquè jo també veig publicitat que, en fi, vaig arribar a veure centres de formació que formaven acupuntors online. Jo això ho he viscut, no ho he vist. A veure, sisplau, motiu per regular-ho. I per tant, el treball multidisciplinar, però quan parlem d'això, no oblidem, el pacient del segle XXI és un pacient que viu en una societat global de la informació i que ens reclamarà empoderament. I que, per tant, això és un canvi radical que jo crec que encara no tenim prou consciència.
Our right to receive the best medical care is limited by the availability of economic resources and its distribution. However, based on the principle of autonomy of the patient and the number of patients that visit the osteopathic consultations, shouldn't the government ensure the security of the patients through the regulation of this profession and the unification of its criteria on a European level?
Yeah, there's no question in my mind, and I can tell you why. If you had a licensing body that oversaw the licensing of osteopaths in Europe, that body would then have the ability to test the individuals, and that way you could bring people up to a level. You would address the issue of schools that are not providing adequate education, but they are thriving because they give somebody a means of earning money, even though they may not be well trained. You can't address that issue without a unified body. If there's no level out there, you could hand anybody the degree and say, well, you're trained as an osteopathic physician, go practice. That's where that unifying body would be so important.
Recent events show the inertial tendency to a global and homogeneous regulation in Europe. The unit of action through the European institutions related to osteopathy and the whole collective seems to be crucial to reach the common purpose that could benefit thousands of people. Humanity, which is sometimes branded as lacking of principles, decayed and autodestructive by nature, hides the other side of the coin that is characterized by its solidarity, respect for life, tolerance, and hope. The osteopathic philosophy follows up on health and coexists with those virtues. Person and society are joined by the inherent self-healing principle promoted by osteopathy. Maybe, if we were aware of the existence of this science, it would help us to become a healthier society every day.
The entire world is oriented towards finding disease. We have to be a different profession. Our mission is to identify health and help to allow for the fullest expression of health, not only in us, not only in our patients, but in society.